Thanks for hanging in. Really appreciate it. I actually think you've made a wise decision, because I think this is kind of an all-star panel, to be honest. And I'm not just saying that because I'm moderating it, but I'm very close to retail. And for that reason, I've been, kind of keeping track, certainly, of, of what's going on in the space as it pertains to sort of this hyper-local level of measurement that we're getting into. So just a couple of points before we get started. In terms of how the retail landscape is in fact being revolutionized by big data and by mobile analytics at the retail level, Chris Anderson said if we look at the numbers closely enough, they speak for themselves, and that if we can find these new correlations within data that are historic, frankly, that we can delve into this data and find things that we never even imagined possible, things that we never knew were there. But I think the converse is true too. I would argue that if you look at these numbers, number of cases of cancer annually, for example, over 1.5 million cases of cancer, annual cancer-related deaths, 577,000 cancer-related deaths in the United States just last year. So if I were to make the statement that if we were able to cure cancer, that would probably eradicate, and certainly elongate the average life expectancy. Would you agree with that? If we were able to cure cancer? Yeah, you would think so, right? But in actual fact, Google ran the numbers on that, and it would actually only, on an average basis, extend life expectancy by 3 years if we eradicated all forms of cancer. So I think the converse is true too, that we can make assumptions about our businesses, especially retailers and CPGs. We make these assumptions about our business that when we really analyze the data, we find out that they aren't true, that these things that we've just thought for many years may be absolutely false. And so these sorts of questions are the ones that we want to get at. What makes my customers loyal to my store, to my business, to my brand? What do my best salespeople do that the others in the store don't? What's causing product returns? If I have this inordinate number of returns coming back, what's causing that? And then what assumptions do we have about our business or our industry that just aren't true? And it all pertains to this notion of big data. Dan Ariely said recently that big data is like teenage sex. He said everyone talks about it, nobody really knows how to do it, everyone thinks everyone else is doing it, so they say they're doing it too, right? And I think that's sort of true, right? You can't pick up a trade journal now without somebody talking about big data and leaving you with the impression that the whole world is adopting big data technology and you're the only one that isn't, and you're the only one that doesn't understand it. But the numbers sort of go like this. 64% of companies say they intend either this year or next year to invest in big data, to make an investment. The estimated U.S. spend on big data technology right now is about $34 billion, but here's the kicker. About 50% of retail executives that are surveyed have really no frigging clue what big data is, right? So, if you're ever feeling vulnerable, just take a look at the person next to you during the session, and there's a 50% chance that either you or them don't know what big data is, so don't feel uncomfortable with that. I think we're all in a state of learning about this. So that's what we want to try, first of all, to understand on the panel is what sorts of data are we talking about? And specifically, what we want to look at is this kind of stuff. We want to look at this on a very, very hyper-local basis. Retail in the past has tended to be very broad, very mass-oriented, very sort of one-size-fits-all, and very latent. All the data that we got from retail stores was like a week, 2 weeks, a month, a quarter late. And it was very difficult to go back in time and say what happened. Why did that work? Why didn't that work? But now we have this new raft of technologies that are allowing us to understand in real time what's happening in the store, what the experience is like, and how consumers are interacting with the space. So with that, I'm going to introduce our panelists. My first panelist is Larry Promisel. Larry is the Senior Vice President of Digital Commerce for Vince Camuto. He's responsible for all e-commerce and omni-channel strategies and their operations and initiatives. Prior to Vince Camuto, he was Vice President e-commerce for Barney's little retailer you might have heard of, managing all aspects of Barney's e-commerce division and from its inception. With over 17 years of experience, he's developed and led multi-channel and database marketing strategies with positions at Bluefly, Coach, and Bloomingdale's. Please join me in welcoming Larry Promisel. Our second panelist is Alexei Agratchev, and he's with RetailNext. RetailNext, who you may have heard a lot about recently in the press, was founded 6 years ago with the mission of bringing e-commerce style analytics to physical retail. Today, RetailNext in-store analytics software is fully rolled out to over 100 major retailers with installations in thousands of stores across 30+ countries. So join me in welcoming Alexei. And lastly, Wesley Barrow. Wesley is with Nomi, another company you may have heard a little bit about recently. Wesley is a veteran enterprise software executive who most recently spent 2.5 years with Buddy Media before starting Nomi. Nomi Measure is a mobile measurement and analytics platform that provides the ability to manage and optimize both online and offline campaigns in a single dashboard, giving retailers insight into campaign performance by merging customers in-store and online behavior. And join me in welcoming Wesley. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being here. I'll just move over to my chair, which hopefully isn't broken. Oh, it works. And we'll get into our first question. So just again, sort of starting with this notion that, you know, there's a lot of, I think, people pretending to understand what big data is and what kinds of data we're talking about when we talk about the things you do. But let's just start by looking at what you actually do. So Wesley, what kind of data are you actually picking up in the in-store environment?
So, you know, we're picking up a lot of things. I mean, we can pull in video data, we can pull in, you know, data coming off people's smartphones, you know, anonymously. We often pull a lot of contextual data, you know, like marketing calendars, you know, things like when people change out windows, when people are changing out inventory, layout, you know, all those types of things. And we try to create a holistic view of what's happening in the store to provide that real-time insight that can drive, you know, further revenue and further action.
And to what level is that, because I know that, you know, with Chuck Schumer in earlier today and talking about his initiative, but to what level is that actually personal or anonymous?
I mean, it's completely anonymous. So, you know, we have future products that are rolling out that will allow customers to opt in. And then in that case, once they've opted in, then we can start to append, you know, their identity to their device. But for now, every single thing we do is fully anonymous and, you know, just aggregate.
So Alexei, you're capturing a different sort of data, different data streams. Tell us about what you're getting.
Well, as you said, we're 100% focused on inside the store. So what we try to do is capture everything happening in the store, all in aggregated basis. Today we can tell through a combination of technology, videos, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, we can tell how many people come into the store, where they go, what they look at, where they stop, what they buy, what they don't buy. We can separate sales associates, we can measure interactions. We can put it in a lot of context in terms of different things happening around the store, the weather, promotional calendars, things like that. We can increasingly collect data about the type of customer that shops your store. So it's a snapshot of the customer that shops a particular store on a particular day, particular hour. So how many of them are male, female, age brackets, how many of them have never been to the store versus come twice a week, where they're from. Again, all of that is not building a profile of you so they can market to you, but understanding what type of customer shops this store on Saturday morning, Sunday afternoon, seasonally, how that changes. And today, there are more and more tools where you can do marketing much more intelligently based on that. But that's the type of data. In terms of the bigness of the data, or is, you know, to give you an idea, today we analyze probably close to about 600 million shopping visits on an annual basis. Obviously, with every store you install, it goes up. For a typical shopping visit, we collect, store, and analyze about 10,000 data points related to how they flow through the store, not including point of sale and other contextual. So it is a ton of data. And the idea is not to zone in on individuals, but really to be able to use that data at an aggregated level to make much better decisions.
So what kinds of things, if you're selling this technology into a retail company. What kinds of things are you focusing on in terms of upside? I mean, it sounds sort of intuitive, but what are the real upsides for retailers that are employing this technology?
I mean, the interesting, if you break down the retail functions into kind of the back office, which is store operations, finance, people focused with running stores, figuring out staffing levels, some level of layout, and kind of driving comparable store sales, and you change that to merchandising and marketing. The initial adoption and the upside and the ROI has been mostly around the back office, so things like store operations. They've been a lot of retail marketing and merchandising is, I think, it take them long. I mean, they're not as data-driven traditionally. They're much more, I think, intuitive and kind of experience-driven. So initially it was the store ops guys that were focusing on the data really to improve how they staff, how they make layout decisions, and it's all about maximizing profit per shopper walking through the store. So if you have a shopper walking through the store, in between when they come in and they leave, how do you maximize that profit? So how do you convert as many of them as possible? How do you drive up your average ticket and keep your costs down in terms of staffing? It was things like that. More recently, the marketing guys got really interested as well, I think mostly because of some of the kind of merge between e-commerce and brick and mortar marketing.
So Larry, from the retail standpoint, from the retail perspective, what are your thoughts on this? You know, we're obviously moving into this period of time where it's sort of, the idea of overlaying web metrics onto the store. But what I guess interests or concerns do you have within this?
For sure, I think in retail we've been collecting information from customers for decades of what they've been purchasing, what they've been returning, their activity, and then bringing in as much personal information with their name, address, email more recently. And now I think retailers are getting even a little bit more sophisticated with that type of information and bringing in notes from the customer. So thinking of the old style, old school client books that they'd have, where they'd have personal notes about the customers and what they're doing, and getting that into a data structure that you can analyze and do more with. And I think a lot of us in retail and in marketing, we sometimes fall in the trap of doing what we think is best for the company and potentially not what's best for the customer. And we need to think about what they want and what the next thing that's valuable for them to interact with us, and using that to drive.
Yeah, I've often said, I think marketers have a view of the world that is sort of that, customers are just waiting to share their data and be part of their community and engage with their brand and all that good stuff. But in truth, I think we all as consumers sometimes feel like it's a game of cat and mouse, right? And we don't make the benefits and the payoff to the customer as readily apparent as we need to. We were talking backstage, and I think really, if we don't want to spend too much time just on the magic of this stuff, because I think the technology speaks for itself. I mean, we can get extremely granular with consumer behavior and really understand it in real time. But on the privacy side of things, we were talking backstage and saying, if I went into a local store in my town 200 years ago, or maybe not 200 years ago, but 100 years ago, and bought a pornographic magazine or something else along those lines, my whole town could know about it, right? My whole town could know that I had made that purchase. We had very little privacy. Today, we can do that relatively anonymously. So my question in this whole privacy debate is, are we really just arguing about nothing? Are we focusing on something that won't be a concern in a year, 2 years, 3 years?
I think there's articles, if you look in the late 90s, early 2000s, there were articles about Omniture, when it first started, saying, oh my God, web analytics, they're tracking every single page we go to, every single, link we click on, they can know everything about our journey. And now, if you were starting an e-commerce site and you weren't getting web analytics in place, like you'd probably get fired within a week. So it's just part of that evolution. I think, looking at physical stores today, the only reason it wasn't, like that 10 years ago was just because it wasn't technically possible. And so now that it is, it's new and it's, unfamiliar, and I think that's creating a lot of stir in the market and with consumers. But I think in a year or two, down the road, it'll just be standard, similar to, like video cameras in store, because retailers need it, and they need it to be able to create that customer experience that consumers want,
Do you think there's an element of physicality to it? I mean, tracking my online behavior, you're right, was something we had to get used to, but what we hear now is that consumers are actually a little concerned that it's physical, that there's a physicality to it. Alexei, do you think that that's part of it?
I think it is, and the fact that it's new and people don't truly understand what's happening. And I think there are valid concerns. I mean, technology, like online, there are valid concerns that people's privacy can be breached. People do share a lot of information, some of which should stay anonymous or not be shared with anybody without their approval. And I think it'll be the same thing in the physical world. Our view, I think most of the discussion has been due to lack of understanding of what retailers are actually doing today. I mean, we have customers that held focus groups, actually try to educate their consumers and got feedback, and it's usually pretty positive once they understand that. I think, actually, like you mentioned, the analog methods of collecting data in retail in many cases were a lot more intrusive, even if they're on a smaller scale. People for decades would follow shoppers around in stores with secret cameras and then spend hours looking at that person's shopping scene. Can they find the product? Is it optimized? Those type of things. For security reasons, people have had one-way mirrors and fitting rooms, so somebody on the back and on the other side watching them to see you're not concealing anything. Those are much, much more intrusive versus what really technology does is takes video, turns it into anonymous data. You can automatically blur faces, do things like that. There's actually lots of things you can built into it to improve privacy.
So, Larry, what does the payoff have to be for consumers? Tell me that. I mean, I agree with you. I don't think that we focus enough on the payoff for the consumer. Ultimately, the retailer is often the customer here. So what do we have to give consumers to allay these apprehensions about privacy?
I think it's, again, interesting about privacy that I was at a Women's Wear Daily conference several weeks ago, and someone from The Gap was presenting, and they presented a statistic from Time magazine, and it was something like the number of photographs taken in the last year were more than the number of photographs of all time up to the end of 2012. It was in the trillions. It was just crazy. And those images are tagged many places in the social networks, and that's okay. So I think it's just interesting, and there's a dichotomy too in retail. When the customers come in, on one end, they don't want you to collect and know too much, but on the other, they like to say, I'm a really good customer of yours. I shop here all the time. So we kind of have to know that data in order to service you and reward you as a best customer, and that your data and customer data is currency. And in exchange for that currency and providing us with that, we need to give you a benefit and something that's measurable and beneficial to you, that you're willing to exchange that currency for that benefit.
By 1999, 2000, this is sort of, I think, our last question. I think we have to wrap up here. But by 1999, 2000, we were saying if you didn't have a website, you were basically out of the game, right? I mean, it had been like 5 or 6 years since the internet became pervasive, and there were still retailers out there who weren't doing a good job on the web. So how long do you foresee it being before what you guys do, offline analytics, how long before that becomes table stakes? And if you're not doing it, you're basically on a road to disaster. Wesley?
I mean, I think that should be happening within the next year to 2 years. Because I think, every retailer we work with, they won't open a new store without putting our technology in place. So it's something where once you've got it, you have to have it. It's addictive because you can't run your business without it. So I think that's, and I'm sure Alexei sees it the same way for his customers. It's just becoming it's like you have, visibility where you were previously blind. Once you've got that visibility, you're not going to go back to a world without it.
Yeah, I can imagine that, especially once you start looking at other streams tapping into weather and we were talking about upstream and downstream of your store, where consumers are coming from, where they're going. Alexei, what do you think?
I definitely agree. I think depending on the sector of retail, some sectors like grocery and fast-moving consumer goods will take a little bit longer. Not because the data is less valuable, but because their business models are a little different, where vendors end up paying for a lot of things, and it's more complex from a business model perspective there. But I think, one data point is when we started the company in 2007, I think we're the first company with a dedicated mission to bring e-commerce style analytics to physical retail. Even 3-4 years ago, we were really the only company. Today, there's probably at least 50 players that are, with Nomi certainly being one of the the ones that are gaining a lot of traction out there that are doing that. That's a good, and I mean, there's a reason for that. I mean, there was no funding going into that space 4 years ago. Now, at least in the last 3 weeks, it's probably been $40–50 million announced alone going into companies in this space. So I think it will, for specialty retail, I think within 2 years, it'll be a must-have for every single specialty retailer. Probably take about 5 to 6 years for the grocery, those guys.
And Larry, finally, as a retailer, what is it that you're looking for from this market? We were talking about kind of this lack of public case studies, and that's been a real problem because everyone's very protective still about their case studies. But what evidence do you need? What evidence do you need before you jump on this train?
Yeah, I think to a certain extent we're already there. The influence of online on offline purchases has been proven, I think, enough. And showrooming and everything else, the way people are interacting and using digital and devices and data to determine what they should do, we're kind of already there. And I echo the sentiments of the rest of the panel that you have to do it or you will be left behind. They'll eat your lunch, there's a certain amount of money on the table, and they'll all grab it if you're not doing it. And I think it's also organizational change that needs to happen, because typically this will end up in IT, or it'll end up in marketing, or maybe even e-commerce. And how you distribute that information organizationally, and then how it's synthesized by them is super important, because the merchants this affects, the store design this affects, the creative team this affects, and all of these data points can help them all do their functions better. And I think sometimes we fall in this trap of, well, the creative people don't care about data. Yeah. Well, that may or may not be true, but they've never been presented with the data. So if we can deliver it to them in a manner that they can digest and take action on, it'll benefit all of us.
In real time, without 90,000 meetings before they make a decision,
Absolutely.
Right? Okay, so we're going to open it up to Q&A. Does anyone have any questions for this incredible panel of ours? Yes.
Yeah, I have a question for RetailNext and Nomi. Right?
Sorry.
Hi, I have a question for RetailNext and Nomi. What's the actual physical infrastructure required for a business to collect this data, and is it prohibitive for a lot of the SMBs we've been talking about today?
Well, I mean, if you look at where the data comes from, it's things like cameras, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth sensors. So yeah, there are, I mean, the difference between e-commerce and physical world, you do have to put physical sensors in the stores that collect that data. In terms of cost of that, actually in many cases, retailers end up saving capital as they move to that model. So what happens is retailers used to buy traffic counters, dedicated sensors just to count traffic at the door. They used to buy cameras just for security, to record video and play it back for evidence. Many cases, we put one platform that does all of those, and then they put Wi-Fi for internal, and the same Wi-Fi can get you data. So we have customers that are actually saving anywhere from 40 to 80% in capital cost, because they're replacing 3-4 point solutions that used to do the same thing. We don't work with many SMBs, I'll be honest about that. We really start with retailers with kind of 30 stores or more, and most of our customers are large tier 1, like 1,000, 3,000 store retailers. That's not because of the cost to the retailer or the value to the retailer, that's more because of our business model and how we sell. We're an enterprise sales model, and we can't afford really to spend time with somebody with 2 stores. But I think the cost is actually of the infrastructure is not going to be a big problem moving forward.
So it's scalable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I echo a lot of the things he just said, but it's the sensors are very lightweight. They can, in our case, we do have some SMBs, working with us because our dashboard is pretty intuitive and self-serve. So, it really just matters like where you are on the spectrum. Like if you're technically savvy and can make data-driven decisions and are used to this type of data, then I think, even if you're a small, store, maybe either a single store that's big or, you're a 5-store chain, I think you can get value out of it. But, in general, like most of our customers are also, major retailers as well, just because they have like an organization dedicated to analytics and they know what to do with the data, and they have an e-commerce wing that's looking at similar types of data and have been able to operationalize that. But yeah, in general, for any of the people in this space, the capital expenditures are, fairly low, which is one of the big evolutions that have taken place. So
I guess that's always been the difficult part about scaling up as a retailer, is that once you get beyond a certain number of doors, you lose touch with what's happening on the sales floor, yes. Right? So it really is, once you get to that 5-store kind of threshold, you lose all sense of what's going on. We had another question just over here. Yes, sir.
Yes, so it's really simple. You probably answered part of it, but maybe not enough. What is the advantage for the retail store to have this data? What kind of benefits can they drive out of this? Operational? I got you briefly talked about this.
I mean, operational data, operational benefits are all around driving up your comparable store sales. And if you look at the actual examples, I mean, there's usually a lot of low-hanging fruit in retail where once you start collecting and looking at the data, you can impact pretty quickly. I mean, some of it is very simple, just better aligning staff with where your customers need help. So we can see 3 to 8% sales increase in a typical specialty retailer by helping them align their staff hours. I mean, the amount of times you see people doing non-selling tasks on Monday afternoon in the back room doing inventory counts or conference calls when there's people that need help, and the impact on sales those kind of things have, you'll be pretty amazing. And then from a store layout perspective, we have lots of case studies, some of which are actually quite public, or in Business Week and other places, about people just once they realize how people flow through the store, they can make changes to the layout where you see anywhere from 10, 15, 19, 20% sales increases.
I think I totally agree that the store layout's huge, where you put your customer service counter, how people are interacting or even viewing your mannequins and the setups and the window setups that you're doing. Just how are they interacting with it? How are they looking for it? And consideration. So as we look online and we say, what's the view to buy ratio? And in stores, unless like in the old days where you're following someone around or you're just watching the store all day, you may not get that same level of data that you will with these more sophisticated tracking mechanisms.
I was talking, just to put a point on that, I was talking to a VP from Kroger last week at a separate event, and he was saying that they've installed video analytics now in Kroger stores, and what it's enabled them to do is when there's a backup at a cache, they would normally call another cashier. They've reduced that now from minutes, where that lineup is building and customers are getting frustrated and some are potentially walking out of the store, to seconds. They can now, analyze when a lineup is too long and deploy another cashier and ease that pain on the part of consumers. So that's converting into a far different consumer experience. Wesley?
Yeah, I was going to just add the other thing we help our customers look at a lot more is marketing as well. So if you're doing an in-store event or you're having a sample sale or whatever you might be, and this is like across the board, whether you're a small retailer or a major retailer, you're going to do a lot of events to try to drive traffic to your stores. And so we can help you quantify which of those events are actually bringing people back to your stores and which ones are not really increasing customer loyalty or frequency of visit at all. So I think that's a really, really big deal, and that's something that's unique, to each individual store. Will have different strategies around driving traffic. So.
All right. Well, I think that's it. So I'll thank our panelists again, and thank you all for hanging in with us. Thank you very much.